Hello, hello, hello. Ah, yes, amazing. These the turn it on button. Good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Collabora Online. Why not? And here we go. Lots of good things. I guess many of you here will know what it is already, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But what do I care about here? Yeah, we can talk about digital sovereignty a lot, on-premise, powerful, WYSIWYG rendering. Important because Microsoft doesn't do that. Microsoft Office Online, thrown away, WYSIWYG for Word. Just doesn't really do it. And of course, it's a bet on CPU threads and network getting cheaper. So far, this has been a good bet. I'm quite encouraged by the vast amount of effort we can leverage in the world's silicon foundries and so on, making things better. And so, yeah, this is going quite well as a sort of architectural choice. And so you have beautiful, word processing documents, open document formats, as Italo would tell you, and docx as well for everyone else. Yes, nice sidebars and image positioning, beautiful layout, etc. Spreadsheets of every kind with conditional formatting and charts and I don't know what else. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, guitar selling examples are popular, and draw just for Armin. So there we are. Ergonomics not quite as beautiful as Impress, but getting there. Lots of key bindings would work and so on. But yeah, so you can then do page layout and make beautiful flyers as well as drawings of your favorite things. And then, of course, presentations too. And we'll come to some of that later, but hopefully looks very familiar. Amazingly, if you look at, for example, Microsoft Office Online, you can't edit master slides. So, bad luck if this image is in the wrong place and it's on the master slide. That's just not fixable. So, just interesting to see. We're really providing a much more full-featured experience there. And of course, it's important that the same UI is then responsive. So we can bundle it up and ship it on our iPhone and our Android device. I mean, they have a different UI. And the UI here takes essentially the sidebar, which perhaps you could see here. Oh yeah, being able to change your slide layout is quite nice as well, isn't it? And so we wrap that sidebar into a different look, which is this sort of one-handed dying menu tree thing, so that these palettes become menus. And so that works really nicely. And so you can do your formatting and all sorts of powerful things on your phone. And the nice thing is if you plug your phone into a big screen, actually the whole app is there. So you can then run the same thing with a more desktop-like user interface. And so if you run your Android app on Chrome OS, you've got a Chromebook, you then get effectively a full-feature, desktop editing program as well, for free, as it were, which is good. So, hence tablet and desktop things. And I think there's a whole load of case studies telling how people did it. This wonderful Open Desk project from Zendesk that we're working with. And maybe you could have seen their talk yesterday on that. Yeah, so when we look at our competition or when we look at our place in the market, I think there are a few things that are really good. So 100% open source code, built with LibreOffice technology, doesn't get better than that, and free software technology stacks. So, this isn't a mess of, ASP.NET and random other loads of, weirdo technologies. It's actually primarily C++ there. So, it runs on quite a nice compiled binary stack, one big blob, and then the kernel underneath and libc, I suppose. And of course, it runs on Linux. It's the best place to develop software, maybe. So yeah, and anyone can contribute and participate. You can follow our commits and see our tickets and so on. And we have public community calls. So if you want to show up and meet developers, talk to them about what they're up to, we have a public call every week. Do get involved. And yeah, and we actually just do one thing. So we're really only the Office piece. And so focus is something that's non-renewable. You can't focus on everything, it turns out. Shame. If we had lots of pairs of eyes, maybe we could focus on more things. But yeah, so Office productivity and documents. And we love to work with partners who do things that seem superficially simple, like file sharing and storage or whatever, that turn out to be nightmarishly complicated when you do this at scale for vast numbers of users and so on. So we like to just focus on doing our bit and not everything. And yeah, friendly open source project, blah, 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 blah. Office for the free world, yes. So here we go. Another thing that's sort of interesting about Cool in terms of its security model is that primarily we're sending pixels to screens. So your document actually exists inside this kind of secure container thing, which used to be a CH root with all sorts of things until Quaylon made it a namespaced something or other, but the idea is essentially the same, that you have this very, very locked down once per document system inside. So each document lives in its own world, there's no shell, There's no, compiler tools. There's no programs you can run in there at all, even. I think it's mostly just fonts and time zone files and locale information, and that's about it. So that's pretty cool. And so it's then very, very, very easy to secure that. Even if you break out of that environment somehow with some twisted file, and we of course, build on the LibreOffice kit, strengths around crash testing and K-Verity and all of those things. Even if you break out, there's nothing there. All you get is your own document back, which, whilst that might be a security problem, probably you sent the document in the first place. So, hey, not too bad. And we send pixels to screens, which is kind of cool. Our competition tends to adopt a different approach, which is of sending the whole document to all of the clients. The first thing it does is download the whole document. And then to try and overlay policy on top. So you can't download, for example, is one policy that people really like. So you can share the file, but you can't download it. You can edit and collaborate on it, maybe you can see it, but you can't print it. This is slightly undermined if the first thing you do is download the whole document to the client, to put it mildly. Because you can't even tell it's a browser you're sending it to. Who knows? It could be a Perl script that's sucking all the data out and saving it. So then how do we make that scale? Well, we deploy that, and we have typically a proxy or a load balancer that will then sort of multiplex lots of incoming requests across lots of nodes. And we make sure that we always get to the same node. The real trick is to make sure the same document goes to the same node. Otherwise, you have a problem. So our collaboration works by bringing everyone into the same process. And so that's pretty cool. We use a thing called a WAPI source, which is not written on there, in the URL to choose which worker node to go to. And that does mean that what you can do is you can then you can scale this thing, and Quickie is working on a beautiful new thing that does Kubernetes dynamic scaling. And in theory, you can upgrade these things incrementally, so you can have very, very high availability in your cluster, which is kind of cool. Anyway, who cares about that? Let's see the latest features. So one of the things I think I mentioned yesterday was this sort of WebGL rewrite. And hey, Quickie could come and tell us about that, probably much better than I can. But all of this beautiful 3D graphics support that seems to work remarkably well in many browsers. And yes, so ultimately the transitions are reasonably easy, moving from one slide to the next. I guess you have one static image and another that you move to, and then doing that sort of chopping up into lots of polygons and overlaying and animating in the client side. It has meant that instead of using animated SVGs, which is what we did for a long time beforehand, we've switched to a much more cunning and potentially efficient way of doing this. So we don't need to convert the whole document in advance to an SVG before we can run it. So you can start on the first slide, and then in the background, the disk is grinding somewhere to convert your slide deck and send it to you. So you can get going much more quickly, which is cool. There's a number of things that have been added in terms of sort of auto-aligning and rulers here and there, and I don't know, all sorts of nice new options, many of which might be familiar to you from LibreOffice in Impress. And then we've had, people want interactive objects in their presentations. It's funny, it's a feature I've never ever used, but some people want it. So it has been added. So all of these nice interaction things and different targets and things that you can do on various clicks and so on. So that's pretty nice. And then present in window is actually really useful and really easy to do. And in fact, it's quite hard not to do present in window. I mean, you have to work quite hard in LibreOffice to actually make something a full screen window on most Linux desktops anyway. There's all sorts of extra work. And it would be really nice to have in the desktop product as well. So we should probably do that. Particularly because this present in window thing, unfortunately, has a nice, nasty about thing at the top that's really hard to get rid of in terms of the URL. One of the slight limitations. But really, really useful for video conferencing and tiling things on your screen while you're showing your slides. And silly missing usability pieces getting in. So I think that's kind of cool. I talked a little bit about this, I think, in the keynote, but really, really useful for building and generating documents. And particularly because you reuse all of that security stuff. It's all self-contained. It's all in these nice pieces. It's easy to generate JSON. And a human being can then edit the template using very familiar UI. It's not difficult to do. And of course, generating a document is one thing, but generating and then tweaking the document to add the final flourish for what it is you want to do, it's really nice to have that combination of editor and easy to do document templating, and then being able to generate those documents at the end as you wish. So that's kind of nice. And we also do file properties. There's a whole load of things in your property page, the custom properties and so on, that it's really nice to be able to just populate those so you can tag and annotate and classify your documents. So it's very much easier for various tools to search and do things with them. And of course, if you just want to sort documents, you can suck data out. So bi-directional, sucking data out and in, creating lots of documents from templates and getting lots of data out of lots of documents and seeing then what to do with them. Something that's quite easy to do now. And Nextcloud has this nice integration, as I see. So you get your templates, you create your template, you drop it in a folder. It then appears for everybody or yourself. And as you create the document, you can then get all of the fields to fill in and fill them in and generate the thing and then tweak it, which is kind of nice. So I think I talked about this in somewhat shorter detail, but there are a number of problems that people have, unfortunately. So one of the things they love to do is run on like a half a CPU system in some background that's also running in Nextcloud, a database, and 3 other things, and then go, oh, it's not very quick, is it? And you're like, yeah, there's something in that. And generally, we would prefer to have at least 4 cores. Not because we're going to use them. We don't use them very much, but we use them to reduce latency. So when you have a large scene you're suddenly rendering, you press page down, there's a lot of pixels there to process, and we want to process them in parallel. So there's kind of a much shorter spike in load, and we can get data to you quick. So bits about your integration and various other bits. There's more of these coming. There's all sorts of creative ways that people manage to misconfigure their servers, and we want to catch them and fix them. I mentioned follow the editor. I think it's fairly simple to understand, and I think very, very useful, but somewhat prettier now, which is nice. And it's amazing, the key binding that you need. There's really a lot of key bindings, so it's nice to be able to look through them, and making track changes more fun. There's quite a lot of contextual tooltips we've added. So often things like VLOOKUP have a ridiculous parameter on it. Then if you can't remember what it is and what it means, you're really screwed. Like your VLOOKUP behaves in a broken way out of the box, unless you put false as the last parameter. I don't know if you ever knew that, but if you don't, and you haven't sorted your range, your spreadsheet is broken. So there you are. We should probably warn on that as well. But yes, it's nice to have those sort of contextual helpy things around to help people left and right. Sum is obviously rather somewhat easy, although this is telling you that it's probably sum, but you could have some ifs or some if or 5 others, that you can do. So I think those are quite familiar from the PC version and now brought across to online. This is a whole load of stuff. I think Allotropy have done a whole load of this, but yeah, so the PDF 1.7 support, which is good. I think we're now looking at 2.0 support, which is also going to be even better, and hybrid PDF stuff. So just nice to get all of that in there. And then there's accessibility. Accessibility is something of a curious nightmare because of the way we do things. So many of the accessibility APIs really rely on people building a pure web app with all of the data in the actual app. And even then, the canvas rendering is a real problem. So we need to render pixels to a canvas somehow, or shapes, lines, whatever. But in terms of an accessibility technology, it wants an object model that it can describe your document so that it can then show this to an impaired person. And the problem is we basically don't have that. So there's this sort of kind of a shadow DOM thing behind the canvas that you can add items into. And I believe that's what we do at the moment. So you end up with a sort of focused set of pieces that would represent, what am I talking about? That represent the bits behind your spreadsheet. So say you're in a spreadsheet cell, it'll create a table behind the scenes, and it will create a cell that matches that, and maybe the cells around it, up and down and left and right and so on, so that the accessibility technology can then give a context and a real position in this huge table without having to create a whole giant spreadsheet full of raw data behind you. And that matches really well what the accessibility technologies do. Typically, they follow focus events, and then they read around where the focus is. And so actually, it works surprisingly well. And actually, most of our accessibility feedback is of the form, why did you use a div for something that's actually an input box in some weird dialogue thing? So we spent quite a lot of time moving away from sort of more custom widgets to more standard HTML widgets all across the board to try and get that to compliant and better accessibility too. So again, more and more features moving to the web version from LibreOffice, and lots of dialogues there that need to be asynced, which is always fun. So one of the things that we're really trying to avoid, well, in a collaborative editing product, it's really important that if one person is running a dialogue, that the next person to run a dialogue doesn't become a child of that on the stack. Because that's really bad, because then, whilst you can close this dialogue here, it perhaps hasn't even taken the action yet, or it's very hard to get the subsequent dialogue underneath undone. And so lots and lots of these dialogues are now being asynced, which essentially means you throw up the dialogue, you associate the code and data with it that you need, and you return to the main loop. And so the next user can do the same, and life is good. We also have an annoying pop-up now that pops up going, this dialogue isn't async, so it's helpful. So easier to find for QA across the board. But there are a very large number of dialogues. I think Quailon has 1,200 UI files, something like that, or fragments of dialogues that are out there around the place. And that doesn't include some of these more silly pop-ups saying, there was an error, you screwed up your cell thing, all of which need work. So there's an incremental job there, and it goeth on nicely. So yes, new filtering, filter by color, all important. I mean, of course, it's probably relatively idiotic to use color as a data value in your sheet anyway, right? So whether we should, a purist would not want to encourage this as a general thing, but unfortunately, humans like that, and they really do. They color lots of things. And, well, ideally you'd use a conditional format and a number and something else, but that seems complicated, doesn't it? So why don't we, but so now we can sort and filter by color nicely in Collabora Online, which is cool. We've also rewritten our read-only mode. So the read-only mode previously was extremely aggressive. It essentially didn't allow any form of keyboard input or mouse input or anything to make it to the other end. So that's the poor man's read-only mode. It's really easy to do that, and that's great. The only problem is, if you're visually impaired, you would quite like a cursor that can move around the document so you can actually read the thing. And wouldn't it be nice if you could select text and copy and paste it out, if that's enabled security-wise, and so on and so on. And if you could click on a hyperlink, that might also be nice. So anyway, we've done a whole load of rework then to use the built-in LibreOffice read-only mode and to adapt how the front end works in that regard. So, yeah, more accessible, more performant, more usable, and again, happy customers. I talked a little bit about this with Quailon. I'm sorry, I've got a blinging problem here. Let me de-bling. Yeah, too many messages. So yes, so previously we had to use capsysadmin, which is basically root privilege binaries. So you can use a suid binary, and when you run that binary, you are suddenly root. The giddy power. And the only problem with that is, well, you're suddenly root, and so that's pretty nasty. And if there's a bug in your program, which is not entirely improbable, then something really awful could happen. And so, yeah. So it's a little bit risky doing that, and so people in their wisdom would disable this left and right on their systems. And the net result of that was there was much poorer containment of each document. You couldn't chroot, you couldn't drop capabilities, you couldn't do even seccomp, I think. So there's a system call that runs a Berkeley packet filter on all of your system calls. So you can spy everything that's called, and if anything is called that looks bad, we just terminate the process straight away. So as soon as you try and kill another process, for example, or you p-trace someone, you try and debug someone else's document, then you die basically inside our containers. And so it's pretty nice. Of course, there's no proc in there, so it's very hard to see other processes anyway, and there's no sys and there's no dev. Well, actually, there's a dev directory with a random and a urandom. I think we got rid of the random and urandom, didn't we? I think as part of this work, we used to have a capability where you could make device nodes, so we could make dev random and dev urandom, which people need. But since then we've patched all of the crypto libraries and the code inside, and we pass in a file descriptor. So when you fork, and before you drop all of your privileges, we can open dev random, and then pass it into this jail that then doesn't have random there at all. And we just clone that file descriptor and use it everywhere. So it's kind of nice. So it's made it much easier, and there's much less necessary. And now with the Linux namespaces, we don't need. Actually, we need very little in terms of privileges to do that on most systems. Although I think there's some hacks with needing Podman to. On Ubuntu, you use Podman to avoid the. I don't know. Quailon has it for the development environment. Perfect. When you install the packages, it says we are okay. You should be happy with us and let us use the container system. So that's pretty nice. Another really cool feature, well, I mean, I like it, only because I did it, obviously, but so occasionally when you were editing, the document would hang. And this is actually kind of a bug. And almost certainly it was auto-saving in the background. But it didn't really tend to send you the fact that it was auto-saving until it was nearly done, which is not very helpful, due to some weird combination of event scheduling and so on. So anyway, we fixed that, but still, it's annoying. And we used to pop this thing up after like 700 milliseconds of waiting. We'd pop up a pretty animation, so you got some idea of what was going on. But even so, that's not very cool. So these days now, we fork, and then we save in the background. So you can carry on editing if, in fact, you edit. It's not very many keystrokes in the 700 milliseconds or whatever, second or 2 seconds it takes to save. So there's not a lot of copy on write duplication needed there. And this thing then just saves in the background, totally asynchronously. It takes about 7 milliseconds to do the fork, and so that's a pretty good time to save an arbitrarily large document. Think giant presentation with hundreds of slides and big images and so on. So we're really, really happy about that. It's not quite as easy as you might think. So there are several things about forking, and you can read the man page if you ever played with the fork function, but it's a very nice function. It's just int fork, no parameters. So it's just a very simple function. Anyone can implement it, right? And the fork returns either the child process ID or I think maybe 0 or something, saying I succeeded. So in the parent you get it, and you can tell whether you're the parent or the child. And all of the process is copied. So all the process memory is copied, and when you touch it, it's copy on write, so it will then duplicate it when you try and change it. So that's pretty cool. But if you have threads running, the threads don't make it into the new process, which is a little bit unfortunate because they may have locks held and they may be doing all sorts of crazy things. So the first thing you need to do is shut down all the threads before you can fork. And it turns out that because, well, LibreOffice is a big believer in synchronous APIs and threading. And Collabora Online is a big believer in asynchronous APIs and as little threading as possible. Now, unfortunately, we have to have a thread per document to make things scale nicely, but broadly, we try and thread as little as possible. So the problem is that, for example, we have this beautiful grammar checker thing, and the grammar checker likes to run off and run in a thread, or maybe Hunspell or something like this. And all of these things could be running, and so they could be running just as you're trying to save. So we had to do a fair bit of work to find and catch all of these threads that come in real use, and make sure they're shut down before we save, or before we fork, and then restarted in the parent after we fork, and not in the child. So that's one particularly fun thing. And of course, you have similar problems with mutexes. It can be quite exciting. I mean, the real problem with threads is mutexes. So if a thread is running and it holds a mutex on, for example, the memory allocator. So if a thread is allocating memory when you fork, the child process then can't allocate memory ever again because that thread doesn't exist. It won't release the lock, and bye-bye memory allocation, which is not the best. Anyway, so we fixed all of these problems. I say all of them, many of them, all of the ones we found so far. And one of the things that we also check is, are there multiple threads before we fork? Unfortunately, with the privilege model that we had, you can't actually load proc because there's no proc inside your jail. So you can't look at yourself to see if you have more than one thread before you fork, which is one of those exciting problems in life. So then how do you tell whether it's even safe to fork? And it's not immediately apparent. But what you do is that you before you've gone into your secure jail, you load the proc file, and then you keep that file descriptor open, and you just rewind it and keep reading it. And so you have this magic file descriptor that can tell you if you have more than one thread. Of course, Quaylon discovered some particularly amusing bug with memory allocation, where we're using this trick to see how much memory, I think, well, I forget. Yeah. So as you rewound and reread, they just not really, whoever implemented this first before Linus fixed it himself, didn't think you would rewind and reread. So every time you read from this thing, it would kind of compound the amount of memory, like I think doubled each time or something, or maybe it multiplied it each time. And so we were killing processes as taking extraordinary amounts of memory when in fact it was just this kernel bug. And so now we have code that detects the kernel bug and works around it, which is always exciting. Anyway, nice to know it's fixed. So interop, yeah, so copy and paste is quite fun in the browser. So the browser has a very aggressive approach to copy and paste, partly because of security, and why not? Security is a great excuse for everything. And so it doesn't let you look at your clipboard because it might have something secure on it. It's almost the opposite to LibreOffice in this regard. So I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but if you select some text and press Control-C, and then you go to the insert link dialog on something, it will auto-paste the text into the link dialog for you. It's awesome. So all you do is click apply. But this kind of thing is not really what the browser is hoping for. The browser is hoping for, really explicit user interaction to drive this. And luckily they've added a new API now. So you can trust an application to access your clipboard. And this is absolutely brilliant. It replaces all of this horror that we had before, trying to tell people you have to press Control-C in order to get the security context, or Control-V, to be able to access the clipboard, which was fine. It's particularly fine for a native web app, but when you have to then talk to a remote server and then actually get the clipboard when the thing is pressed, it's a bit of a problem. Because by the time you've done the Control-C, you haven't actually got the data for a large element. So there was all of this sort of downloading, and anyway, it's all a bit of a fun problem. So people would have to press Control-C twice, or whatever, to make it work. So anyway, Miklos, in his wonder, has come and fixed most of this, which is brilliant. And so we got rid of a lot of this downloading thing, and that's fantastic. Now, the old web API used to have 3 content types that were interesting, which was text plain, text HTML, and text RTF, rich text format. And it just so happens Miklos is an expert in rich text format as well. So, but the good news is that you can store almost everything from Microsoft Office into rich text format. So say you wanted a rich chart, you would actually get a chart when you pasted it from your desktop app into your Collabora Online. And it would be a real chart with real rendering and real, shape properties and data inside it and so on. Unfortunately, what they give with one hand, they take away with another. So the new Clipboard API no longer accepts RTF, which is pretty irritating. I believe we get SVG as an alternative. Is that right, Miklos? Is it a... It's the copy that's the problem. Okay, so the paste is working, but the copy won't give you anything that you really would like to get out of your process into another one. So if you're pasting between spreadsheets, say, it would be really nice to have your, your formulae as well as the rendered number. That's kind of useful, and your formatting and so on. Some of this rich stuff. So. Anyway, so that was really sucked as a major regression. Now we fixed copy and paste, but we can no longer send all of the rich document data. So anyway, so Miklos then went and reverse engineered the Google Sheets extension. So they already have a whole load of extensions for ramming this extra information into HTML, which were not standardized at all, as I recall. Although they are now written up beautifully in our SDK, so anyone who wants to use them can. And so then that's going to preserve your formulae and your values and your styling and so on. And yes, Google Sheets HTML origin. Look at that. That's fantastic. So the good news of that is, of course, that my hope is that it works for the PC version as well. So if you're copying and pasting between Google Sheets and LibreOffice, you should get the same benefits as well. So yes, but also when you're pasting between Collabora Online, between different sheets. So some chunks of wins there. Better fallbacks? I forget. I'm not really an expert on this. The style ref stuff is pretty cool, though, I think. This has been really wanted for lots of people. When you have very large documents, it can be very hard to navigate them when they're printed out. And so having a little header that has the top title in your page is really useful. And so that's done through the style ref feature. So we added that. Interoperable and beautiful. So performance-wise, we've done a whole load of work to parallelize things that happen during startup. So during startup, you basically need to serve all of this JavaScript to the client. Then we need to come and connect back, and then authenticate via a remote server, download the documents, and then finally we can be rendering it. Wouldn't it be nicer that if the first time you open it, we serve the UI files, and at the same time we're authenticating the user, downloading the document, and so on, creating new connections. So it's just getting you to drawing tiles very much quicker. We massively sped up tile compression as well. So yeah, there was a really silly bug in the threading, which we fixed. Which is good. My bad. I wrote all this threading code and it wasn't used, it turned out, because I got an if instead of a while or something. Anyway, what can you do? Something like that. And then we also massively improved the run length encoding of these things. So combined together, you can get up to something like an 18 times speed boost. I think if you went to Quailon's threading talk on Calc, you probably saw some of that. We thought that this massively reduced our crash testing time, but then we don't know really what did that, and who knows. And I talked a little bit about this and just the long-running profiles being extremely, extremely useful. So this is sort of why we tackled the rendering problem. So you can see, so this do render thing is rendering tiles, and yeah. Well, anyway, there's a bit of painting the tile here and drawing it, and then there was a lot of other stuff. And it would be really, really nice to have got rid of that. So to some degree, we're doing a delta generation. So we're trying to time compare. So we're looking at the difference between the past and the present. But yeah, this is really not good. And this is just doing unpremultiplication. So for various reasons, because it makes sense, Cairo does premultiplied alpha, which just means that if something's 50% transparent, instead, even if it's pure red and no green and blue, you'd have like 255.00, and then 128 for your alpha, say. Instead, pre-multiplied alpha, they've already halved it, so it's 128.00, 128, because that's much easier. You don't have to then multiply it every time you composite and so on. So anyway, unfortunately, the web technologies use raw RGB, unpremultiplied, for no readily apparent reason that anyone can work out. And in fact, there are all these bugs going, oh, I write this RGBA in, and then when I read it back, it's a different number. Why? And that's really annoying. So we're doing a whole lot of work that then the browser would undo as well, and it's just a scandal. So anyway, we pushed this all off to the JavaScript side and let JavaScript deal with it. Why not? That saved a whole lot of time. We threaded this thing, and then we did a whole load of AVX2 magic on it as well. So turns out with AVX2, and this is only for 4 pixels, you can do 8 pixels at a time. So you can compare vast numbers of pixels, and by cleverly shuffling them into chunks, you can compare them. And having compared them in a single cycle, 8 pixels at a time, you get these masks which are either all 1 or all 0 in terms of bits. And then using a magic move mask PS, is that right? Sign. Anyway, there's a special thing that will pack all of the sign bits, assuming these were floating point numbers, into a bit mask. And that's fantastic. You get an 8-bit bit mask that tells you if each pixel was the same as the last one, if that makes sense. So this is a very useful tool in run-length encoding. And we can then look up this mask, of which there are only 256, in a table that says, well, if these two are the same, we only want one of them, and we want the next one to come here, and so on and so on. And so you can do effectively a combine that will sort of gather all of the things that you need. So sometimes it's all of them if they're different, but very, very often there's a great similarity. There's a lot of white with then black text on it in documents, turns out. So we can gather those all down to almost nothing, and then using a pop count, we can count the number of bits, work out how much we didn't need, and it's very, very, very fast to do that. And the nice thing is it's completely branch-free. So the run-length encoding is just a straight loop of 256 pixels. So that's pretty nice, and it's way faster. Of course, there's a whole load of other things that we've been doing, freeing memory, trimming on idle, and various other things, more aggressive image swapping to try and get those out, and so on. And reducing re-rendering. We still re-render far too much. If you type a character in Writer, it re-renders the whole line across it, even though there's nothing needing doing there. So yeah, there were a lot of silly things we found. One of the silly things we found from our customers is like, the latency, it's not performing very well. And it turned out that they had like 64 threads, parallelism on 8-core machine or something. So it's just all of this, ridiculous wasted scheduling overhead that wasn't doing anything useful. So yes, I think that's pretty good. And another thing that really helped was compressing the tiles on the wire. So previously we would compress the entire tile for a keyframe. So whilst we would run length encode, so we'd run length encode tiles internally so that we could store more of them to compare them with the last one. But we would send essentially the whole tile compressed on the wire. And actually, that was really quite quick. It didn't show up in the profile. Z standard is very, very fast at compressing repetitive data. But it turns out the JavaScript in the browser at the other end was really quite slow at decompressing it, and particularly so for Firefox. So Firefox had a massive garbage collection problem from the subarray stuff. So we said, well, we'll just send it run length encoded on the wire. much less data, much less to compress, and the JavaScript was far faster at decompressing it. So what else? We discovered lots of stupid stuff. I mean, like, 20 users joining simultaneously onto a 5-page writer document. We were just re-rendering and doing loads of foolish stuff, improving scrolling, various other things, loading large slide decks and so on. So we've done a whole lot of other things too, as you might imagine. So Drupal integration. So there's a really nice Drupal plugin now that's coming along to do good things there, and actively in use. Actually, it's various customers of ours are just plugging things in. I think I've talked about the main problem of accessibility. We've done a lot of stuff on dark mode to make that look nicer. Keyboard accelerators with yellow pop-ups over the top. Look how beautiful they don't look. And better page navigation there. And various other interop things. I'm sure you're probably familiar from these from the core. Improved pivot table stuff, Miklos multi-page floating tables. Lots of improved tweaks of usability around there, lots more async dialogues. Yeah, fun things around. So the WASM, we've done some WASM pieces as well with Alatropia's help that makes this look pretty good. And so that you can run the same user interface then in the browser. And essentially all we're doing there is we're compiling not just the LibreOffice Kit piece, but also Collabora Online itself to run in the background as WASM in another thread. So that'll run off main thread and then handle all of this good stuff. And it suffers from all of the interesting problems of WASM that I think have been so well presented elsewhere. But hey, it's a nice proof case that you can then take this and run it offline. So beyond that, loads of cool kids that did great things. Thank you very much to them. And yeah, and the team. And I'm afraid my talk, I think I have 7 minutes early. So we might even have time for a question. Is that right? We do. Fantastic. Well, thank you. You've been very patient. Any questions? Thoughts? Comments? Heckling? Unhappy users? None? Oh, brilliant. That's excellent. Okay, I'll pick on people then. Go for it, sir. No. Of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so by itself, Collabora Online doesn't do very much. Well, I mean, it does a huge amount, but you can't make it do it, if that makes sense. So when you compile and run it in development mode, we have a sort of horrible hack where you can pass a file URL in, and it will load a random file off your disk and then allow you to edit it. We don't ship that in the enterprise, in the product version. That isn't there, right? So you then need a WAPI backend that allows files to be served and edited in it. So to do that, you're going to need a Nextcloud, OwnCloud, PyDOC file, something else that we can embed into. You have a Nextcloud. Oh, fine. So if you have a Nextcloud, there's really 3 ways you can do it then. So one of them provides us valuable data on the demo server. I don't know if you saw our profile thing, but so if your IP or domain name is globally routable, then you can use our demo server, and so you don't need to set up anything at all. You can just put that in, be aware that it sends the documents to us, and then we send the pixels back. We don't, keep them unless your document crashes and we need to analyze it briefly. But yeah, so that's one mode you can do. There's also a thing called rich documents code, which is just quite amazing. So there's an app image version of Collabora Online, and the app image is downloaded into your PHP web server, which then spawns the app image in the background and talks to it down a Unix domain socket. And so instead of having a WebSocket, we have like PHP requests every 25 milliseconds that shuttle this thing to and fro. And it's amazing that it works as well as it does. So that's another option. But it doesn't require, setting up any other server stuff. If you have Nextcloud, there's an all-in-one Docker image that you can just grab that has Collabora Online built into it. So it comes pre-configured, you just run it and it just works. That's the hope. And otherwise, you can either get packages or a Docker image, set that up, and connect it through. There's one URL you need to configure there, and hopefully life is good, of course. We try, but of course, the great joy of the web is HTTPS and certificate management and So, yeah, we can sort of hide behind a web proxy if you have one of those that does SSL unwrap, and we quite like that. That's a good way to be. Does that make sense? So there's lots of different options, and yeah, some much better than others. Ha, cool. Thank you for a question. There's a second brave person. We have 3 minutes, 51 seconds. I'm probably making that up. No? Well, you've been very good. Thank you very much. Happy hacking. Enjoy.